Welcome, all economics students and others, to our third distance learning video session. Hope everyone's holding up well under the coronavirus circumstances. Today we're going to be looking at some issues facing our country and how they would be reflected on macroeconomic graphs and models. Obviously, this will help us better understand how the coronavirus crisis is impacting politics and economics, aside from obviously the social ramifications. The first issue that's very pressing right now, and I expect to continue to heat up in the next 2 to 3 weeks, is the issue of governors and our president debating lives versus the economy. And what I mean by that, and the debate that's raging, is there are a number of politicians and government leaders who are suggesting that we should go back and open the society sooner than some of the medical experts and other politicians are saying. For example, here's a quote in the Los Angeles Times where Donald Trump has said, quote, "We've never closed down the country for the flu." Trump said, "So you say to yourself, what's this all about?" And recently, he also mentioned trying to go back after April 12th, Easter, and that drew a lot of criticism from a variety of public officials, and that would hurt our chances of containing the virus. So if we were to look at the PPC curve, we would actually be comparing lives on one axis and jobs on the other axis. And obviously, if we go back April 12th, we'll be putting more emphasis on jobs than if we go back and open the economy after April 12th. So if we decide, let's let the economy stay closed till April 25th, May 15th, June 1st, whatever the case may be, we'll be valuing lives over jobs. And this is not the first time in U.S. history that quality of life, worker health has been pitted against jobs and company profits. So if we go back to a video we watched months ago about brown lung disease, something known as vicinosis, you may remember seeing some of this footage.
In 1978, a troubled textile industry was told to spend $2 billion to combat brown lung disease. By 1980, the Supreme Court was asked to choose between saving lives or jobs and profits. How much is a life worth? And who should bear the cost? Wilderness or mineral?
So we learned that the government had to choose between worker health, and a lot of the people were getting sick because they were breathing in dust at textile factories. And sure enough, our government decided to make the companies provide better aeration systems and other technology at the factories, which cost a lot of profits and therefore jobs. So we chose, way back when in 1978, 1979, we chose lives over jobs. And that's what was focused on. Now, 42 years later, we're grappling with the same question. Should we go back and open up society and risk lives with more infection? Or should we help our economy? The president and others have argued that it's more than just our economy, but the psychological state of many of our citizens, people entering depressions. The word depression, which we all remember from 1929 through the 30s in our country, is actually a psychological state, not an economic concept, even though it's used to describe a period where we had 25 to 33% unemployment in this country. So it's also a mental state. And the risk of going back too soon and opening our economy is we might have a steeper curve of coronavirus cases. And if that happens and we get to this peak here, which New York is expected to see in the next 14 to 21 days, is you would have an overstretched healthcare system with a lack of capital resources such as ventilators and beds and other necessary materials to deal with the crisis, versus if we have a flatter curve and we don't have people out and about so much, hopefully we can keep the curve flatter and therefore more manageable for our healthcare system, including the workers, the human capital. So another way to draw the PPC, or the production possibilities curve, would be we're working on consumer goods being produced right now in our economy, as well as military, also known as guns. And what is the guns or the military used to fight? Right now it's used to fight the virus, so we'd be talking about beds and ventilators and masks, because our enemy at war right now is the coronavirus. So again, what we're doing is we're actually allocating, and General Motors is supposedly in talks with our government to make ventilators instead of cars. So we'd be making less consumer goods and more goods for dealing with the virus. So another way to look at this PPC would be allocating more resources to providing items for the war against the virus. And Tesla is a company that's been making ventilators instead of cars with some of their resources. And a number of U.S. companies are changing their production methodology. Henry Schein, a medical supplies producer, is working on producing an antibodies test kit. Actually, they've already come out with one that supposedly shows antibodies within 45 seconds. And many, many companies, such as Gilead Sciences and Regeneron, are trying to come up with that panacea, that immunization for the virus, as well as other companies trying to produce some sort of pill to deal with it. We've worked with a Zithromax cocktail along with chloroquine to see if that works. So these are the various ways that we are reallocating resources, and this is how we would look at this on the production possibilities curve. So just to reiterate, regardless of which political side you're on, there are different perspectives on what's more important, the economy versus saving lives. And the reason I wanted to start with this today is expect the debate on this to really heat up in the coming weeks. In particular in New York, as we hit our peak of cases right around Easter in the middle to late days of April, when the president had originally spoken about us returning to work and opening up society. Let's now look at a few other graphs, and I'm encouraging you as we approach the AP exam to get out blank paper and draw graphs, rather than passively looking at graphs in textbooks and workbooks. But use blank paper, and if you want to get outside, then maybe get out some sidewalk chalk and draw some graphs in your driveway or on a sidewalk, wherever you may reside. Of course, keeping that 6 to 10 foot distance from others, as our government officials have urged. So we have the most prominent graph in our course, aggregate supply, aggregate demand. Obviously, we are entering a recessionary situation. We announced 3.3 million jobless claims on Thursday. So obviously our equilibrium is going to be to the left of full employment, LRAS, indicating that. So the government has done a $2 trillion spending plan fiscally with the hopes of shifting aggregate demand back to full employment GDP. Will they be successful with this? Time will tell, but as you see, that leads to a higher price level and obviously an increase in output. So that's how we would graph the $2 trillion government spending plan on the aggregate supply, aggregate demand model. Now, that will not come without side effects. And if we wanted to see the opportunity costs or side effects, we would go to the loanable funds market graph, and we would obviously know that loanable funds are really, really fun. So we're going to use real interest rates on the y-axis and quantity of loanable funds on the x. I reiterate, draw these graphs on blank paper on your own to see if you can do that without accessing a textbook or a workbook. Know what these graphs show, how to label them inside and on the x and y axes. Now this would show us crowding out. The government is going into deficit spending. We're going to increase our national debt with this $2 trillion spending plan. Make no mistake. We are going to be demanding loanable funds, which is going to increase interest rates because we're going to be ultimately shopping around our bonds to whoever will lend us money, whether it be China, Japan, Great Britain, the Federal Reserve, or other lending institutions looking for a safe investment, and that will make interest rates go higher. So that would be the loanable funds market graph demonstrating crowding out or an increase in interest rates as a result of the $2 trillion spending plan. However, our Federal Reserve has gone ahead and done record amounts of buying of bonds and other measures to free up liquidity. So we're going to now draw our money market graph. Can you draw this on blank paper without me showing you? So we have quantity of money on the x, nominal on the y. Ask yourself, how do we draw the inside? We have money supply, labeled MS as a vertical line, and money demand, labeled MD, intersecting it with a 45-degree angled line or a curve. So when the Fed buys bonds, tries to ease things, create more liquidity, we see a shift in money supply right, and therefore we now know our interest rates are going down. This will obviously offset the crowding out or raising of interest rates in the loanable funds market. In addition, this will ease things for businesses who can take loans at much lower rates, basically 0%, and keep their doors open as long as possible, pay their employees, and continue hopefully to buy capital goods. So these are our two most prominent graphs to show fiscal and monetary impact on interest rates. Another graph that I think would be crucial for us to look at would be the Phillips curve. And remember, the Phillips curve shows inflation on the y-axis. How do we remember that? I is a vertical letter, and it pits unemployment on the x-axis. We know that these two have a inverse relationship, and we're going to label this SRPC for short run Phillips curve, and we intersect that with a vertical LRPC. Ask yourself, what makes this graph different than any other? a shift to the right is bad and a shift to the left is good. This is the only graph where this holds true. So with a coronavirus, and we ironically spoke about this in January, if a coronavirus or a computer virus strikes the economy or the country, that's going to shift LRPC to the right. This is more than a short-term thing. Hopefully it will be short-term, but it certainly looks like we might be dealing with this for much longer. And we see that that has shifted right. Also, the short-run Phillips curve, because this is a shifter of aggregate supply, the entire curve is now shifting outward, therefore raising unemployment and inflation. So that's our Phillips curve. Now, if the AP asked us specifically about how the $2 trillion government spending plan would impact the Phillips curve, then we would look at a point shift, obviously, and we'd be actually looking at unemployment decreasing because they're spending money. Hopefully that will bring back jobs and aggregate spending. And we would have an upward push on prices, inflation. So if they ask specifically about the $2 trillion or any tax cut or putting money in people's pockets, we would go from a point of A to B. But if they ask about the virus and its larger impact on the economy, we would have the whole curve shifting, not just a point, and we would have the LRPC shifting as well. Let's also remember that LRAS and our aggregate supply, aggregate demand model, if this is a permanent situation where we're going to be permanently having issues with our supply chain, we would shift LRAS to the left. So those are a number of the different graphs in our discipline that would be impacted by the coronavirus. Again, I hope everyone is being vigilant and following precautions and staying in as much as possible, not spreading the virus, and being selfless and not thinking it maybe in your short-term needs and desires, but rather what's good for our society, good for our country, good for our state, and more locally, good for New Rochelle. So I hope to see everyone soon, and please continue to read and study your economics. Have a great day.